Mark Allison, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Elders. Thanks for joining us in the evokeAG studio.
Great to be here.
You've got a pretty interesting session here at this conference, and it's offering a very corporate perspective on global opportunities. What would you hope people would take out of that session?
Yeah, I think I always believe that reality and value creation is the key. And so innovation and research for the sake of it is nice, it's stimulating. My first degree is agricultural science, I love it myself. But in terms of the productivity issues that Australian agriculture is challenged with today, it's very important that the innovation creates value in some way. Lower cost, less time, or premium price, in that sort of realm.
Now, the future of farming. Traditionally, Australia's always been about the family-owned farm. What do you think the future looks like, Mark Allison?
I think the family-owned farm will remain a dominant part of our landscape for many years into the future. I think the emergence of more corporate farms has been occurring incrementally over a number of years, but the bread and butter of Australian agriculture is the small, medium, a bit like small business across Australia actually, because the characteristics of farming require a practical, pragmatic, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week attitude. And I think that's one of the big benefits of family farms.
Do you see that there could be advantages with more corporate farming in future?
I think there may be. I think in particular sectors, clearly in intensive agriculture, corporate farms have much greater access to capital and they can adopt the latest technology and clearly there are benefits there. But across mainstream broadacre in Australia, mainstream extensive pastoralists in Australia, I think there will remain a place for family farms.
Agriculture is fundamentally challenging to be in. I mean, you're at the mercy of the elements and all sorts of things, really, markets. Is there anything that keeps you awake at night when you think about Australian agriculture and, in particular, I suppose, Elders' role in it?
I must admit, this is my 7th CEO role in agriculture, and my perspective has always been that the critical aspect in farming and in running ag companies is that you start off with a capital and cost base which allows you to make good money in bad seasons and make excellent money in good seasons. And I think if you stick with that philosophy on the financial discipline, and it does sound very, very corporate, but it's also very, very practical. If you stick with that philosophy, if there's a drought, you don't go under. If there's a flood, you don't go under. And I think there's that aspect, which is just the pure database financial discipline that it should apply, I believe, to all livelihoods. Having said that, agriculture has a certain nobility about it, and I think the key things that keep me awake is the increasingly separation of metropolitan thinking and people from the nobility of agriculture. And so the lack of understanding that the greatest of environmentalists in Australia are actually farmers. The lack of understanding that the greatest care of animals and the highest proponents of animal welfare in Australia are farmers, because they care about their land, they care about their people. And I think that link has been broken over the last 30 years, and that does worry me, because the nobility and the importance of feeding people has been lost in a number of areas.
More broadly, how do you influence that, and more specifically, how can Elders play a role there?
I think influencing this sort of issue is education, but it's very, very difficult because we have generations living in social media and there's no validation of facts, as we all know, and I'm not complaining, this is our life. In terms of Elders' role, I think our role is to do a whole heap of things like we're doing with evokeAG, like my role as Chairman of Agribusiness Australia, like multiple other regional rural investments and communications we do to try to help bridge that gap to understand what a wonderful industry agriculture is.
Let's move now to the international level. What sort of global opportunities do you see ahead that excite you, Mark?
Well, I think, in my sense, our closest proximity markets are the ASEAN countries. Indonesia is our biggest wheat market, and China. And so we have 800 million people through ASEAN countries, 1.2 billion through China. And my sense that China's our greatest trading partner. And my sense is that actually taking a decision, a clear decision that we don't have to pick between China and the US from a geopolitical viewpoint, but take advantage of the wonderful changes that have occurred over 30 years in China and also have occurred in the last 5 years with the Belt and Road initiative that the central government's put in place, the improvement in intellectual property protection laws that are still to be tested. But this is our biggest trading partner, our closest proximity market, and I think being able to take advantage of that is a wonderful opportunity.
Obviously, politically at the moment, there's a bit of a standoff between China and the US. Do you see that as a short-term problem or potentially something to be concerned about longer term?
I think there'll be a natural balance, as I'm sure you are as well, as a student of history. I was out of interest. I was reading a book out of Harvard Press 2 weekends ago that said of the 16 emerging countries and incumbent countries over the 5,000 years of history, I think it's 12 of them went to war. And 4 didn't, and most of the war started with a trade war. So I thought that was quite interesting as a by the side. But I see it optimistically. I think China has a right to make China great again, as other countries that we know have a right to make their country great again. And I think Australia needs to be they're our number one trading partner. We have a very large Chinese population, and there's no reason for us to do anything other than have a great relationship with China and not have to make a decision between one or the other.
Information and knowledge are always the key to success in just about anything, really. With Agriculture 4.0 and the rise of big data, where do you see that going for Elders? I mean, is that something that you are focused on?
Yeah, we are, but there's a slight different bent on it. And having been an ex-Monsanto guy at the early part of my career, and with Climate Corp and Monsanto's desire to conquer all data, big data, and own the world, I think my learning from that, particularly with Australia, with a much smaller number of farmers, that the data, first of all, from a privacy viewpoint, the farmers own it. So aggregated data is very, very helpful to make better decisions. Aggregated data should not be owned by one entity, and should be. I'm a proponent of a single platform that allows everybody to make the best use of the data at an aggregated level in order to have significantly improved productivity. How we compete with our competitors or farm machinery companies compete with their competitors is a completely different story. But if we have one set of facts and one set of data, I think it's a much more constructive and helpful scenario.
I'm sure you're absolutely right, but it's very interesting hearing that come from you and your corporate perspective at Elders, because, I mean, that hasn't been the case in the past. There's been a real strong interest in owning that data, hasn't there?
Well, my perspective, to be honest, has been the same through my whole career. And maybe starting as an ag researcher, I mean, data is the key. And, my argument back then was, hey, all agronomists in my district, competitive agronomists, have the same data, and I will back myself to give the best advice. And so I think it's a mindset issue. But this competition, fragmented competition scenario in Australian agriculture is one of the problems and one of the handbrakes on our productivity improvements.
And looking forward, if we do reflect a little bit on history, Australia's been great when it's come to invention and innovation, but we haven't always been really good at actually taking that through to commercialisation and successful adoption.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
I think that's right. I think part of the lack of commercialisation again has been around fragmentation. And if I look at pour into my own past, there was a great case study of successful adoption. Was conservation tillage, zero tillage, a lot of the variable rate technology, which is driven out of the Monsanto launch of glyphosate here in '78. I think the difference, that product was never exclusive. So it was for everyone, and all of the development, all the trial work, all the data was for everyone. And so it wasn't a competitive advantage. There was a little bit of competition from older chemistry like spray seed, the bipyridal group, but fundamentally Even the Zenica at the time, who had spray seed, had sulphosate, which is touchdown, which was their equivalent of Roundup. So there was a whole of industry desire for it to succeed. And I think the fragmentation is the handbrake.
The focus now is very much on food. People are so interested in food, where it comes from, how it's grown. Where do you see things in 10 years' time with now agriculture back in the spotlight like it probably hasn't been for a long time and being so fundamentally important?
Well, I think it'll, to answer the question, I might give an example. I spoke to a group of ag science third or fourth years late last year, so myself 40 years later, and I remember what we talked about with guest presenters, and what they were talking about was environmental sustainability, it was around traceability, it was around carbon footprint, it was around a whole heap of issues that will be focused on and will be delivered. And so I think our big challenge is to ensure that we don't lose markets in the meantime. And by that I mean the big emerging markets.
Mark Allison, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Elders, thanks for joining us in the evokeAG studio.
Thank you very much.